Hello everybody and welcome to Punatulkut. That always messes me up because aspiration on the two and Punatulkut has to have a very harsh, strong thing. But yeah, this is a very professional, competent outfit, as you can clearly tell. I'm Tuomas. I'll be hosting this thing, and I'm also multitasking at the moment, so I'm talking with Jared and managing the stream at the same time. So if there are problems, please do let me know so I can fix them. We'll be talking for an hour or two thereabouts, as long as we want, for goodness sake, and as long as we feel like it. So please, our dear audience, do use the chat to present questions, comments, whatever you like, and we'll bring them into the stream as we see fit. No guarantees, though, of course. But yeah, our guest today is Jared Bauer, who is the co-founder of Wisecrack, the very, very nice YouTube channel that is so much more professional than this one, and also a writer on it, and has recently moved to Finland, so a fresh immigrant as well. Jared, welcome to the stream, and what did I leave out? What relevant details did I omit?
I don't think you omitted anything too important. I think you did a good job.
Okay, thank you very much. So, how have you liked Finland? How long have you been here? Like a month or something?
Yeah, about a month. I landed here on August 4th. So It's been about a month and a half.
Yeah. So how have you liked it so far?
Well, it's very early. Everyone says that you can't really judge a new city or a new country or a new town or whatever that you're living in for 6 months. I think that all of the things that I had read about Finland have been mostly accurate, that everything works, that, the medical system is very convenient. I've found that I've already gone to a couple of doctors. People have said, we were even talking about this a little bit before the stream started, that Finns are very shy. I've actually found that to be maybe a bit truer among the older Finns, but anytime I get lost and I approach a younger Finn, they're actually extremely warm and very willing to help. So I was actually quite surprised that the shyness didn't seem too egregious to me. Let's see. The only complaint I have is that the bureaucracy was a lot to get over at first, but none of it seemed unwarranted. It was just kind of a lot to do in a little amount of time. The weather I'm enjoying. I'm originally from Texas, Houston, which is super, super hot, and I always hated it. And so I'm actually glad to be in a colder temperature. There's lots of dogs here, which I love. And so I really don't have a lot of negative things to say so far. I'll also say that, and we can talk about this later if you want, I think I've maybe even mentioned it a couple of times. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the taxes, and everyone was like, oh my God, the taxes are so high, and oh my God, the alcohol is so expensive because of the VAT. But I got to tell you, compared to San Francisco and Los Angeles, it's not different, at all. The taxes and the alcohol prices. And then when you think about in California, there's two things. One, the amount of taxes you're paying and how expensive everything is, you're not getting anything. For Los Angeles, there's barely public transportation. There's no universal health care at all. And, there's a lot of poverty, and all the streets are basically smeared with dog shit and a lot of potholes. And, you're actually getting something for it here. So, I've actually been a little bit surprised that, I didn't have a heart attack when I got my first paycheck. I was like, oh, no, that's just regular California living.
Yeah. Yeah. sort of lots of hidden costs. I've been to the States a couple of times, and it's really freaky having to figure out every little thing, like the taxes on products. Like you're not informed about how much something costs until you're at the checkout and you check out the receipt, and that's so many forms of fucked up.
Yeah. I mean, after you do it for a week, you kind of in your mind add 10 or 15% or whatever, and so you kind of get accustomed to it. But yeah, I hear you. It seems a little bit silly. The one thing that the US still does that boggles my mind is, and it even boggled my mind when I was in the US, but now that I see a real country doesn't do it here, is that, God, the US, they still use fax machines for fucking everything.
What the hell?
I know.
What?
I know. I was even trying to get some medical records transferred from Texas to here, and I was on the phone, and they were like, "Oh, do you want us to give us a fax number? We'll fax them." I'm like, "No, I don't want to give you a fucking fax number. It's 2021. Are you kidding me?" And I was very glad to see that, like, people have that reaction here when I mention a fax machine. But I don't know why, but the Americans are, like, really holding on to it, especially in the medical industry and the legal industry and in a lot of business atmospheres. It's so stupid.
Yeah. It, like, sounds a lot like gatekeeping, that you can't really do paperwork remotely unless you have this one machine that has absolutely no use for any other purpose.
Yeah, maybe. I really don't know. But it just seems a little bit ridiculous. I mean, maybe it's just that all these administrators are old and don't want to update their ways of doing things. I don't really know.
Yeah, it's a sort of a legacy form of conducting business. But you've also got, like, well, they over there, because we're in Finland now, in a civilized country. Like also like checks, like writing checks. My dad had a checkbook in the 80s. I remember that, but we sort of got rid of them in the 90s, and it's really weird to think about checks that you have to cash somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I got paid in checks for my first job, and so I think they're pretty widely still used, for sure.
Yeah, it's really weird for a country that really profiles itself as being at the bleeding edge of technology and progress, and has roots in, well, revolutionary activity. That the idea of chucking away these old moth-eaten concepts of how to organize a country, and then sort of got stuck in it somehow.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I have very little knowledge of government in the United States other than what I learned in school. I really have no idea why they cling on to these old relics. I think a lot of it has to do with any time that any kind of modernization that comes from some sort of bureaucratic office is suggested. It's, there's the classic, like, oh, that's socialism, oh, that's communism, like if the market isn't the one that leads the way, then it's not worth doing, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, the cult is very strong there, it seems. That, like,
I mean,
yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the propaganda, I don't know. I have kind of this sick thing, dark sense of humor thing where, like, I really, like, kind of on some dark level appreciate the the art form of propaganda, and gosh, like, the free market propagandists are just, like, good at what they do, and I'm kind of, like, in awe of them.
Yeah, me too. Like, I'm constantly like, I wonder at the expertise they have, because ultimately, like, that is, like, the greatest virtue, or, well, let us say strength of capitalism, that you have to generate new markets. So you need to have and you need to make people buy shit they don't need. So you absolutely, definitely have to have like a huge core of people whose purpose in life is to, or at least purpose on the market is to convince others to act against their own interests. And
just
like,
generate
it's a systemic thing.
Generate that desire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And
it's another amazing thing about Finland that I'm not used to being in a city where there isn't advertisements plastered over every square inch or square meter.
Yeah, it's very regulated actually, where you can put advertising, which is it's such a pleasure.
Yeah, I think it really is probably very good for your health mentally.
Yeah, probably. I can't really say, because like my trips to the States have been like they were conference trips, and I stayed at the Marriott in Orlando, Florida, and I didn't really encounter that much of the sort of wild landscape of Florida, which is sort of...
Go to Disney World?
No, I didn't have time, or money, or inclination.
Yeah, well, you definitely would have spent a lot of money.
Yeah, that you can't really get inside without that.
Yeah.
No. Actually, I was wondering about this, because much of what we nowadays hear in Finland about Finland comes from outside, largely thanks to Bernie Sanders, who sort of touts as this socialist country, which we're definitely not. No, not by any meaningful definition of the term. But we are social democrat, sure. How much of your like mental image of Finland was shaped by like Bernie rhetoric?
Not a lot. In fact, I didn't come here because I thought this was some sort of utopia or that it was a social democracy or social democratic nation. I came here, my thinking was honestly, well, it was, first of all, I had an opportunity to come here. There was a company that I work for now that was willing to relocate me. I realized that I didn't have any friends in Hollywood. And, I had just left Wisecrack. I had just broken up, or my girlfriend and I had broken up. So I was just literally at ground zero in terms of what do I do with my life. And I realized that, oh, wait, I won't miss anyone in Hollywood and no one will really miss me. I can do whatever I want. I'm untethered. And so there was an opportunity to move to Finland, and I always wanted to live abroad, and I wasn't getting any younger. And from the research that I did, Finland did not seem like a shithole country. So I was like, let's just do it, man. As far as Bernie Sanders and him talking about Nordic countries and the Nordic model, I actually think he really failed in a way. Like he was never specific. It really bothered me about him is that I think that now having lived here, I think that part of his platform could have been much more specific, his talking points in particular, about how exactly can the U.S. achieve something similar in Finland? Because he always had this one platitude that he would always resort to and just say, there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from these Nordic countries like Finland, Sweden, etc. Whereas, I mean, as someone who's paid taxes in California for the last 11 years of my life, I'm genuinely curious, how is it that California, which gathers or collects more taxes than any European country every year, how is it that there's so much homelessness, there's no medical infrastructure that's government funded whatsoever, all of the roads are like shit, everything I mentioned earlier, how does that happen? Where does the money go? I would love an answer to that because I'm still trying to figure it out. It can't be that the population is just that much bigger because I think the tax accumulation is just so much exponentially larger than it is. I mean, maybe it's all goes to the military. Maybe that's the answer. I don't know. I mean, that's possible, right?
Yeah, and the police, and the two have very little difference nowadays.
Sure. But I, yeah, I would like to understand. I mean, I can't help but think maybe it's also corruption because, again, compared to Texas, for example, yeah, Texas has property taxes, but they don't have a state tax like California does, and California also has property taxes. But again, where's all that extra money that California's getting from, supposedly taxing tech companies and, a bigger population and the wealthier population, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I would believe you if you said that it's all the military. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, we do spend obscene amounts of money on the military. But anyway, like, even someone like me who's not someone who's very politically minded, I mean, I only really talk about politics as it relates to culture because, as you can see, like I'm very much a culture nerd. But I would love for Bernie to have been more specific about like, okay, well, where do we allocate money? Where do we take money away? How is this going to work? Because he never really did that. And I think that was a huge missed opportunity for people like me who were willing to listen to him, but could only really nod along with his detractors when they said, yeah, but how's he going to do it? And I was like, yeah, how is he going to do it, Bernie? Fucking tell me. I want to hear it. Not that I'm saying there wasn't an answer, but he wasn't saying anything.
Yeah, I think like Bernie is really good at sort of making noise, like pointing in a direction and having people look there. But he does lack this concreteness, this like practical approach, and he could really use a sort of partner in that, someone who like brings up the numbers then. Which is like you need both of those. It's a collaborative effort. It has to be because you can't have like even if you have in one individual the expertise in both like economic policy and in rhetoric and oratory, you don't really have time to do both. You there aren't enough hours in the day, and ultimately the media sets its limelight in a certain way and frames things in a certain way, and it's not really something you can that easily control.
Yeah, and of course, not every speaking opportunity is appropriate to bring out solid numbers. Oftentimes, as a politician, you're just trying to rile people up, get people passionate about the movement. But there have been times, like even when he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, for example, like that is a long form conversation. That's where it's appropriate to really get into the nitty gritty. And he couldn't even do it there. And I think if I remember correctly, Joe Rogan even pressed him on this exact point that I'm talking about. And Bernie didn't have any specific platform, anything. And it just, even to someone like me who wants to believe, it did seem to me like he didn't actually have a plan for how he was going to make this work.
Yeah. Yeah, but well, politics is a spectacle, largely.
Yeah, it's theater.
Yeah, but being like having spent a lot of your adult life in Hollywood, you probably have a sort of a handle on that. Because I watched your discussions with Douglas Lane on Zero Books and your interview with Ben Burgess. And you went into some, and I recommend those two to anyone watching, like after the stream, of course. But yeah, you went into some detail about the sort of fakeness of Hollywood, and what it means to be like progressive or leftist in Hollywood. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
This is the big tragedy for me because I feel like this is where the left gets really dumb in the United States. And I really think that we could just cede all of this ground to the right and just say, yeah, we're wrong about cancel culture. Yeah, we're wrong about being overly dogmatic about representation in media. Yeah, we're wrong about having to politicize all elements of comedy. We can cede all of that ground and not lose any policy propositions. I think that if we did that, the right would be much more welcoming to some of our suggestions on policy, because having grown up in Texas my whole life, I grew up around a lot of conservatives, and I honestly don't think that they are so turned off by these various social democratic platform or policy platforms. I think they're just really turned off by the culture of the left. And man, if I'm going to put on a real tinfoil hat, like hopefully this is the craziest thing I say during this stream, but like I really think that there's a chance that all this, because in America we have this thing called the Freedom of Information Act, where after 40 years, all government documents that were classified get made public. And so there are all these books being written about what the CIA was up to in the 60s and 70s, and it's fucking horrifying. And to think that, that intelligence agency isn't up to some shady shit right now, as well as the foreign intelligence agencies, it's hard for me not to think that this whole woke shit, that to me at least seems so egregiously dumb, is not some kind of psyop by either the CIA or foreign interests that are just trying to maintain the status quo in America. Like, how do we make Bernie Sanders' platform seem just grotesque? Well, we start a culture war by basically like stoking the passions of people on the internet. That's the craziest thing I hope to say, but I mean, I can't help but think that when I read these books about, the CIA documents that come out.
Yeah. Like COINTELPRO and that sort of thing. Yeah. They have a definite history of doing these things, but like most conspiracy theories, that sort of seems unnecessary. I don't really see any reason for the CIA to, or the FBI or whoever, to interfere in any way into these discourses, because these discourses, what cancel culture, wokeism, whatever you want to call it, is, well, it is a product of the media we use, that like Twitter, as we talked earlier, that we stand in awe of marketing folks. I stand in awe of Twitter as if I have a job title, it's game designer, and I am in awe of what they've done with Twitter to make it seem like a news, like established news, like something that anything entered into there is very serious and should be considered very seriously. It's a sober-looking platform that limits your characters so that there is no way ever you'll be able to convey your entire idea unless you like chain it out in a chain that you can't really be shared very conveniently. And then if someone does quote you, no matter what their intent, the end result is that you are taken out of context. And then also you can't edit, so that if you have a misrepresentation there, because you had to be so brief, then you can't go back and edit it. The outrage machine will just do its thing, and even if you correct it in a tweet later on, that doesn't get much purchase, because the algorithm doesn't really give a shit, because it's not trending. So
yeah, I mean, you're totally right. I say that, half jokingly, and yeah, you're right. I mean, the infrastructure is there algorithmically to create this phenomenon on its own. There's no reason to necessarily put your tinfoil hat on, but I mean, I'm mostly saying it for sake of entertainment. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of just things that are really gross in Hollywood. I know a lot of people who, I'm trying not to just be too repetitive of the things that I've said on other podcasts, but like I know this one person who their entire brand is, and this is actually common, most people do this, and I really dislike this notion that people need to kind of brand themselves, because then they end up branding themselves in something like a Twitter is something that's as consumable as a tweet, as you said. So like there's one person I know who's like the depressed comedian, and everything that they talk about is like jokes derived from their experience with depression. And there's another person who's the Native American, and all their jokes are based on like the struggles of having a Native American identity in America. And they're just relentless about it. Every tweet, every Instagram post, every Facebook post is about depression awareness, Native American awareness, whatever. And it's really sad, because in some of these situations, these people are really talented. They don't need to be kind of whoring out their identity like this. They don't need to be making kind of what I kind of consider a little bit of like cultural blackmail, in which they're just kind of painting themselves as some sort of a systemic victim to make it like a cultural, what's the word I'm looking for? It's it's like, yeah, that you have a cultural moral imperative to hire them, because then you're doing good for the world by giving voice to depressed people or Native American people, whatever. Like you don't need to do. I mean, maybe, the truth is maybe you do need to do that, because the only way people get hired in Hollywood and a lot of industries is through nepotism and connections. So sometimes if you don't have those connections, it's really difficult to break out. And because we live in such a highly politicized time, it's understandable that people will kind of, race to the bottom like this, because it's kind of their only chance. But that level of desperation that everyone around you is just conforming to is just gross. And just like it makes it just a really just crappy environment to be in.
Yeah. I think it has a lot to do with, or maybe it is an extension of hustle culture, where you like this neoliberal ideal that everything you do, you should consider entrepreneurial, that you should do it to a professional degree, and you should commit to it, and you should have your life like in orbit around this thing, and if you don't give 110% to that one thing, then it's not worth doing at all. So that really drives you into desperation. And also the platforms that we use feed that, because you don't get visibility unless you put in a lot of effort, and even then it's not guaranteed.
When we sold Wisecrack, I was on the phone with a PR rep, and basically this person was talking to me and my business partner about how we wanted to frame the press release that was going to be in the trades about the acquisition. And I don't think she was very prepped for the call. I don't think she really knew what this was. So she was asking all these questions, and one of the first questions she asked, this was like in mid 2019, she said, "Are there any white males that have a sordid history that we can expose? Because that's what really gets clicks." Just, it almost sounds like I'm making it up, right? Like it sounds like, how could anybody be so on the nose about it? But to her, I don't even think it was cynical at all. She was just doing her job. She was just doing her job, and she knew what kind of content generated the most income, and that's what her job is.
Yeah.
And the other gross thing about Hollywood is it's not just cynicism based in profit accumulation. I think she also, there's like a cultural environment. Basically, she thought, like her coworkers and the overall just vibe of the culture supports her in thinking that actually what she's doing is moral. That like she can feel kind of like morally elevated in seeking out these evil. I mean, I want to say evil people, but I think that's giving her too much credit, because she's only interested in evil white men, and exposing them, because that's what the march of culture requires. I don't know. I mean, but it was just stuff like that, just people who were just so ruthless and so just not mindful about how each other are human beings. Really, it's just everyone else just seemed like a pawn that to be used for someone's social mobility.
Yeah, it's very competitive from what I've like entertainment in general. Like the entertainment business in general tends to be very competitive, but it seems that Hollywood has like perfected this. That everyone's very precarious. That you can't really rely on your career prospects unless you're like a big star, and at that point you have so much capital that you don't really have to work anymore anyway. So you have this very narrow elite that people are it's marketed to people that they too can be movie stars, and then when in actual fact that's not going to happen, like statistically to like anyone, like it's a 1 in a million.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. I mean, yeah, I think that it's I mean, in terms of cutthroat competition, I mean, yes, it is, but it always takes the form, it's always really gross because Hollywood, it's based on talent, and talent can be extremely subjective. In another industry that I fantasize about, like math or something like that, or engineering, it's either you build the bridge and the bridge works, or you don't. Whoever builds, gets the math right fastest, or whatever, they win. That's the competition. But in Hollywood, what so much of the content that's made is just garbage, and it's just filler for advertisers and stuff. And I really don't think that the nature of the competition is not, oh, well, everyone is working really hard to be a better writer or be a better director by making better content or getting their timing better, or, really focusing on their craft of camera movement, or investing in new equipment to make sure that, or, taking more acting classes, or, developing your relationship with actors. No, the competition is done in personal branding. And the personal branding can take the form of, as I said before, kind of taking your ancestral pain and whoring it out to the masses in hopes of getting attention. It can take the form of being overzealous about certain political issues that you think will get you more Twitter followers and more cultural capital. It could take the form of, being an outspoken supporter of something, but it's very rarely is it about your ability and your talent. It's about how do I used to say, like, it's not about what you do in Hollywood, it's that you did it. And what I mean by that is, like, you can have the best script in the world, but if you're like a middle class white guy who, went to a public school and then graduated, like, that narrative isn't very sexy. But if you have a mediocre script, but, you're this, the son of, the son of a famous architect who, shares the same name as his father and wrote a screenplay about architecture, even though it's shitty, it's sellable because that narrative is like, from the son of famous architects, like the meta narrative. I don't know if meta narrative is the right word here, but like the personal narrative is more important than the actual content or the quality of the content. And so that, again, is extremely cynical. And that's why, like, just, God, television and movies are just fucking awful these days, because it's just a lot of rich people who are hiring people based on, how magnanimous it makes them look to their very rich peers, and protects them from criticism because, they live in these giant mansions and, are, I've never seen wealth inequality more egregious than in Los Angeles. And they're not concerned about the quality of the content because, the marketing, or excuse me, the advertising model on television is such that it doesn't even matter if your content is good. because you can't actually track if the advertisements that the marketers are paying billions of dollars for actually convert into new users like it does on YouTube. And that's why YouTube content is actually better than television content, because people really have to compete for eyeballs in a way that they don't really have to as much on television. And granted, it's still very hard to have a show with multiple seasons, but it's just like, all right, one season that didn't do well, let's just get another season of some shit. And it's just like, they're just recycling trash.
A lot of inertia there.
Yeah.
Yeah. My sort of guess when it comes to these sort of media executives and these rich people who just have their people grind out content, it strikes me that like people really want to think of themselves as good, that as moral, so they don't hate themselves. But if a billionaire has to look at the sort of economics of how they became billionaires and how they stay billionaires, that's an untenable position. If you look at it from an economic perspective, then you just have to own up to you being bad. So when you're rich, it's better to sort of ignore the economic side of it, and then to salve your conscience, you look at social injustice that you probably don't really care about that much, but you just want to appear like good, not only to others but yourself, so you can like look at yourself in the mirror. And I sort of sympathize with that, but it is a systemic issue, because billionaires can't really get rid of their fortunes. Like they sort of could, but if a billionaire should like dump all of their property all of a sudden, decide, okay, I'm out of the rat race, or I want to abdicate my position of authority, it wouldn't take a lot of months for all that money to end up in the hands of other billionaires. So there's this very deep futility about doing anything that makes an actual difference. So then you end up doing theater just to consider yourself a human being, and that's where we're at. I mean, we're all victims of the system.
That is a very charitable perspective to have on billionaires, one that I might not have been so sympathetic as you. So, but you're absolutely right. So I commend you for that. And that's why this kind of woke stuff has become so popular, because it's class agnostic, or at least the rich people found a version of it that was class agnostic and grabbed onto it and said, okay, let's yell this from the speakers, because race is our scapegoat, so no one talks about class, race and gender and all that stuff. And it's the perfect foil for them to feel like good people to themselves. But the truth of the matter is, my disappointment with a lot of people on the left is that, to me, this very obviously leads to what I like to call Get Out style liberal racism. And when I say Get Out, I mean, the Jordan Peele movie. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I haven't seen that one, actually.
Oh man, you got to see it.
Yeah, it's on my list.
But anyway, so for example, I know this girl, and I was having a discussion with her, and I had just finished reading Kimberly Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins. I don't know if you're familiar, but like, how in the United States critical race theory is like this big buzzword that everyone's debating about. Well, Kimberly Crenshaw is like the Chuck Berry of critical race theory. She started it all. And the girl I was talking to was a alumni of UCLA, and she said, oh yeah, Kimberly Crenshaw taught at UCLA, and I'm so proud of that. And I said, do you know what Kimberly Crenshaw, what her positions are? She was like, no. Have you read anything that Kimberly Crenshaw has ever written? No. Do you know anything about what she's created? The answer is no. And And I said, so why are you so proud of that? And she said, oh, because, she's a prominent black woman who's, made strides in the discussion about black progress. But in my mind, you're basically just tokenizing black people and using them as kind of like a almost like a fashion icon that you kind of are wearing. Like I'm not racist. I love Kimberly Crenshaw, even though I don't know anything that she said. Because, I just, appreciating a quote unquote successful, smart black woman is, just looks good on me as a fashion statement, as a good, conscionable, progressive white person.
Yeah.
And again, there's a lack of critical thinking here in how that's pretty dehumanizing to black people to, be judging them not based on the content of their actual work, but based on the fact that, they fit a politically savvy demographic for you to promote.
Actually,
and that's yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, this particular example sounds a lot like tribal affiliation more than anything else. That yeah, we wore the same color sweater at one point because we went to the same school. So that I identify with this person, so I will defend this person because you also know about them. Because it might not be quite as selfish, that it might just be more of an unconscious desire to just maintain the tribal identity. Because actually one of the things that strikes me is that in the States, it seems to matter to a lot of people which school they went to, that the what you're an alumnus of actually matters. Whereas here, at least in university, you don't really identify with the school, you identify with the faculty. So that you identify with other humanities folks, and you identify with engineers or like natural, like science or whatever. But it's a sort of a different sort of tribe. I think that this sort of tribal affinity is a lot more powerful because we don't interrogate it. We tend to even celebrate it, like sports teams. You're supposed to have a favorite sports team, and it is seen as a virtue to be consistent about this thing, and that's just really messed up. And I think it really bleeds into this matter what is often called cancel culture or woke scolding or whatever, that you end up, because you're supplied with so little information, but you are expected to present these moral judgments and have an opinion, then you really don't have any other resort than to just consider, okay, who do I identify with, and then go with what they say, because that's all the information you have. So again, I see this more of
you're so much more sympathetic. Yeah, again, you're so much more sympathetic than me. The distinction I would make there is, first of all, I agree. Like, obviously, this is, it's sad. Like, I'm not a big Joe Rogan fan, but he said it. He said that, like I think it was even Ben Shapiro asked him, like, what do you think's going on? Like, why is everyone losing their fucking mind in this country? And Joe Rogan said, I think it's just toxic tribalism. And that's an example of, like, damn, I don't like the guy, but he's fucking right. He nailed it.
Yeah.
Anyway, the distinction I want to make there is if we're kind of talking about like being an alumni to a university and kind of likening that to a sports team, I am comfortable with the notion of, let's say, I'm at a store and I'm wearing a certain sports jersey and I see somebody else wearing a sports jersey and I say, yo, man, cool sports jersey, man, go team. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the situation that I'm painting for you is more like there is because this person does not feel very strongly about all of the alumni from UCLA or even all of the famous alumni for UCLA. This would be like if we were in a store and there were 10 people that had these sports jerseys on, but you picked out the one that was a black woman and said, that is an oppressed culture that I need to, basically prove to everyone around that I am, promoting their well-being and their social advancement. So I make a scene in the store about how grateful I am that we're wearing the same jersey.
Yeah, you tweet a black square with the hashtag Black Lives Matter and sort of end up messing up the whole thing. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, that is one thing that if you're not conscious about oppression, then you of the oppression you yourself experience, because the liberal oppression that the capitalist oppression really does hang over us all. Even that girl might have well had a lot of student debt. But then, because, for instance, class factors are not supposed to be like a part of it. That we're not supposed to discuss that, because then you're just a failure in capitalism, or you haven't hustled enough if you're not successful. So if you're not allowed, you feel bad, and you need to do something. You need to do something to make the world a better place. So you end up blindly supporting things that, like, in and of themselves are valuable and definitely worth supporting, but you end up supporting them not out of knowledge or passion, but out of anxiety and ignorance. And that's really fucked up, because then you end up with these like black squares tweeting hashtag Black Lives Matter things that end up stepping on the people, like joining the oppression in a weird way. And that's a real pity.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah. Of course, I already forgot what I was going to say again. I'm sorry.
No, well, actually,
it'll come back to me.
Actually, there's a question in chat. How's the dating scene in Finland? TNG Binding wants to know.
So, the dating scene in Finland. I feel like I'm just getting rejected by hotter women, to be honest.
Well, that's something.
That's something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the women are definitely gorgeous here, and I haven't really gotten a chance to meet a lot of women. But because I just moved into my apartment and I'm kind of getting settled in my new job and stuff. But I'll update you on that later.
Yeah, check out, follow Jared's Instagram. Then you'll probably be wiser about this eventually.
Yeah,
but the pandemic hasn't really done any favors to creating relationships.
No, it hasn't. Definitely not. That is true.
Yeah. Actually, one of the things, now that dating came up, like, I'm very frustrated with, like, Tinder and whatnot, because, again, they're seen as marketed as beneficial somehow, and in a sense they are. They do allow people to connect, but again, people don't realize, and it's very kept very quiet, that it is not in the company's interest to have the users be ultimately happy, or find relationships, or find alternate means of finding them. The purpose, the greatest gains for the company and its sort of legal duty is to make you dependent on the app and not too happy, and basically terminally single, or at least desperate for company. That would be like the sweet spot.
Well, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of, the way the system works is just to produce as much desire in its subjects as possible, because you can kind of say the same about every industry. Tinder ultimately wants you to continue desiring more and more and more flesh. McDonald's wants you to consume more and more and more of their food products and such and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the case with all of these industries, right?
Yeah. Inevitably they have to do this, yeah.
Yeah, maybe Tinder is particularly gross, and I would agree with that. Their algorithms are kind of a black box, which I don't know. I struggle with this. Part of me sometimes wants to say that like all of these social media algorithms should have some level of transparency, but how do you have responsible transparency to how these algorithms work while still allowing these companies to maintain their competitive advantage? Not something I've been able to really figure out, but I think data and like tech ethics is a whole nother kind of gross thing that I spent a lot of the beginning of this year reading about. And I'm pretty passionate about, and even the new industry that I'm working in, which is gaming, which sounds like we're in the same industry now. It's funny, like the company that I work for, they just hired a sustainability expert. I don't know what the fuck that is. But like, it's just like, again, like, oh, I remember what I was going to say before. Okay. It's just like more like corporate guilt alleviation. And, but nobody wants to talk about the fact that, hey, our entire user acquisition business model is based on like auctioning off or just like, throwing money, and whoever throws the most money gets the attention of this person who has like a shopping addiction problem. Yeah. But that's too important to the validity of the business. So we won't talk about those ethics. But when we're talking about like green energy and stuff that has nothing to do with the way that the business works, we'll hire a sustainability person because it's just good PR. And what I was going to say earlier, which goes on, I think the biggest grift just waiting to happen, the biggest business opportunity in America is just find a way to alleviate guilt for rich people. Just give them that placebo in some kind of creative way, and you will make it. As a matter of fact, I might even listen to my own advice here for my next company.
Yeah, like, get your food from Whole Foods. You'll save the planet.
Yeah. I mean, like, gosh, this is going to sound like a joke, but I think something like this would actually work really well in Los Angeles. Like if there was just like a service where like, and this is going to sound horribly racist, but like that's the point I'm trying to make, is like if there was some sort of service where you just like rent third world people for like a day and they just describe how horrible their lives are to give rich people like perspective. So like they feel like, oh, I just paid this third world person to come and share their lives with me. I shed some tears, because like there's this whole guru industry, which is a whole joke in itself in Los Angeles, where like, every rich person has like, 6 healers and like 12 yoga gurus and stuff. But like, I really think that would go over really well in Los Angeles. And that just, again, proves how these rich people are. And, you may be right. I'm not being sympathetic enough because it's a part of the system. What else can they really do? Although, at the same time, like, fuck you. Go outside, start writing checks to homeless people. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't give it to a charity. I'm very skeptical about charities. Every charity, and, this is, I think, just a product of me living in Los Angeles, but every charity I've ever, like, had any contact with is basically, like, some rich guy has a daughter or a son who wants to do something good for the world, and so he gives her like a $10 million check for her to start her charity, and she or he says, "Yay, now I can pay like three of my besties $300,000 a year, and we'll just chill." And there's this really nice guy named Dennis in Africa who says he's giving clean water to people. As long as we keep on giving him, $15,000 a month, we're good. Like, I'm just so
Yeah.
skeptical. Again, I think that charity is so much just guilt alleviation again.
Yeah.
But anyway, like maybe I'm being too cynical, but like again, when you're in a place like Los Angeles where the wealth gap is so obscene, you see things like this that seem like some kind of parody of reality, but it's actually real. And when you get accustomed to that being just normal, that's when your mental health starts to slip because you start feeling a little bit crazy.
Yeah. Um, well, actually, I'm not in truth quite as sympathetic as I express myself, but that's because I really want to avoid moralism, because ultimately it doesn't matter what you think; it's what you do. So if I make speculations about someone's thoughts and ideas and values, what goes on inside their heads, then it's better for me to have a charitable default, so that I don't end up like hating the person and focusing on the person and what their values are, as opposed to focusing on the systemic issues. I always like to think about, okay, how much does it matter what they think? Does it really matter what goes on inside their heads? And I prefer to have this very materialist approach that it's your actions that matter, and uh, like it still matters to some degree. Like my opinion of a person is related to how well-meaning they are, because people fuck up and so on and so forth. But when it comes to these political systemic issues, then what goes on inside your head is ultimately irrelevant, and it really needs to be reflected in the real world, or it, actual change, or it didn't happen. Which comes to relates to these charities, in that they often are basically a tax dodge, because they're fully refundable, and then you get to have control over other people's lives, which is really, really fucked up. So yeah, if you want to do like something good, then hand cash to homeless people. That would be much more preferable. Like
Right.
a lot of cash, lots of people.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. That's what I want to tell everyone at the Oscars while they're just like clapping at themselves for just how righteous they are. It's just shut up. Go and help somebody, you fucking phonies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things I struggle with, doing these streams and videos and whatnot, is that how much of this is actually like useful activism, and how much of it is simply me trying to, or well, us, for the various people that make up this channel, it's us like just wanting to feel better and feel like we're doing something. Because like it's something that we need to remind ourselves of in the left, because there are so many leftist content creators nowadays, and really good ones, that watching those videos isn't activism. It can be educational, but unless it translates to actual action in the physical world, it's just entertainment. And yeah, I'm blaming you, the viewer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways to look at that. I mean, first of all, if this is just for fun, there's nothing wrong with that. If it's something that gives you joy, there's nothing wrong with that. If it's an agent for change, I think you should also be a little bit more charitable to yourself, because, even if you have a small audience, it's still the size of a movie theater. and because of, technology, you can reach those significant numbers of people. In terms of changing people's minds, I mean, that's really hard. I mean, I think, even people with audiences of millions and millions of people have not been able to successfully do that. Um, so, and in terms of doing real material change, uh, I still think you're doing better work than if you entered into the academy
Mm.
and were, trying to change the world from the ivory tower.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one of the things. Like I really wanted an academic career once upon a time. Then it sort of dawned on me. Well, like the reason I haven't didn't go there really was health issues. But the reason I lost my passion for it and the desire to have an academic career was that I realized that it really didn't amount to jack shit. It's like theory is important, and we need some people like figuring out these theoretical matters. But the academic ecosystem is such that you're hustling for jobs, you're hustling for grant money, you are at the mercy of rich bastards who hold the purse strings, and the amount of usefulness isn't up to you. That's the thing, that in like established academia, in universities, there is no like freedom of research, like scientific freedom. It doesn't exist anymore, if it existed at any point. So that if you want to have like actual academic independence, then you need to have a peer group that isn't like financially dependent on anyone, and that's not going to happen. Well, those happen, but they are limited in impact because they don't have capital behind them. It's a big problem.
Everything that you just said, I think I could also apply to Hollywood. Uh, in terms of, instead of not having research freedom, it would be creative freedom. And again, like all the people that I moved to Hollywood with that were my peers that quote unquote made it, they only made it because they could stick around longer because they had trust fund money
Yeah.
to survive, you know. Um, by the way, I remembered what I was going to say earlier. I actually know a billionaire. Have you ever met a billionaire?
Not to, it's probably not. No, not to my knowledge.
Well, I guess I know the son of a billionaire.
No.
And I wouldn't say the guy is happy. He's a close friend of mine, and I think he deals very heavily with guilt, and I don't know, and I think he struggles also to where to put that guilt. And so, yeah, I mean, to what you were saying earlier, I definitely can draw upon personal experience to be a little bit more sympathetic to people who, just like a poor person, they didn't choose the situation that they're in. Um, but at the same time, they have more opportunity and have more freedom to choose whatever path they want and to make that difference. And they're in this particular situation just not pursuing it. But, at the same time, it's his or her life. It's not up to me to really dictate what should be done with that unlimited freedom. But in general, I do kind of agree with this kind of bastardized Sartrean point of like, you should pursue the freedom or you should take advantage of the freedom that you're allotted.
Mm.
And so in a lot of ways, some of my trust fund friends who made it in Hollywood, I get it, good for them. They
Mm.
could have just, lived quote unquote post labor and just, bought a house and just chilled for the rest of their life. But, they are trying to make it in entertainment, which is a tough grind, even if you are rich. So, of course I envy them. Of course I'm jealous. Of course I wish that the playing field were more level. Of course, I wish that talent was more of a indicator of one's ultimate success. But at the end of the day, at least they're not just giving up and just being comfortable for the rest of their lives.
Mm. Yeah, well, people go crazy that way, really. If you don't have anything to do, then you're fucked, really.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I took basically a year off after I quit Wisecrack, and I didn't miss working once.
Yeah,
not
but
once.
You were recovering. That's what you were doing.
Yeah.
You had a job
Yeah,
there.
I mean, for sure. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, I hear you. And I actually had some friends that I was connecting with during my recovery that were laid off because of COVID, and they kind of felt similarly. They're like, yeah, I feel so guilty for having this big gap in my resume, but at the same time, if anyone ever asks me, what were you doing during that time? I'm just going to say, enjoying my life, because it's the truth.
Yeah. And that's the fucked
Yeah.
up thing, that we could actually provide that freedom to everyone. There are resources, plenty of resources to do that, but the capitalist system just ensures that it can't happen, that you have to have gross inequality and growing inequality, because otherwise the system would collapse. And that isn't... We can't have that, of course. Because if you think about millionaires, especially billionaires, that... Okay, how much does a millionaire, like a multimillionaire, and a billionaire's quality of life differ from each other? Is there a real difference?
I mean, negligible. Really.
Yeah, sort of a...
I mean, I assume that's what you're thinking too, right?
Yeah. That you can't... There's only so much money that you can enjoy. Only so many resources that you can put to use in a way that is satisfying to you, even. So you end up with just not even hoarding things. I think that's the wrong term, because the system causes accumulation, even if you don't do anything, and you'd have to be very active in redistribution in order to actually... it would be a job for a billionaire, a full-time job, to get rid of their money or even lower their net worth a little bit. It's really
Yeah,
messed up.
but why is that so ridiculous? I mean, why is it absurd to think like, well, a lot of these billionaires are spending, 14 hours a day racing towards the dystopia.
Yeah.
Why is it so absurd to suggest they use that 14 hours to race away from the dystopia?
Yeah, like true. It would be much preferable if they did sacrifice that. Did go to that effort, but it strikes me as sort of maybe a mirror image of social democracy, that it would be a defensive stance, that even if billionaires were constantly redistributing their wealth, the system causes accumulation anyway, so that all the money they put out also flows back to them eventually, so that there is no winning that battle. Same in social democracy, that it's trying to patch up those, patch up the wounds that the violence of capitalism causes. That we know that capitalism is a harmful system, and that it causes actual violence, inflicts actual violence on people, and it messes people up. But instead of changing the system, we end up blowing on the wounds and putting a band-aid on the boo-boo and giving them some ibuprofen and saying, well, there. Life sucks, but what you're going to do? And that's not a sustainable position. You're going to lose eventually. You just make the decline a bit less painful.
So the only ending is Snowpiercer, basically. the train just goes off the rails, and we're all back to a state of nature, and we just have to figure it out.
Yeah, like capitalism has very strong contradictions that guarantee that it will collapse. The thing is that it'll probably kill us before it destroys itself.
Mm.
Uh,
Well, fun.
yeah. There's a comment in chat. TNG binding, or is it binding? I'm not sure. But as a Star Trek fan, I will, until corrected, I will spell this TNG binding. Ha ha ha! It's like that line Office Space. What would you do with $1 million?
Would do absolutely nothing. Is the answer from the movie. My favorite line from Office. Have you seen Office Space? No. Okay, so
it must be really frustrating to you being like, I've seen your streams with other like movie geeks, and then chatting with an ignoramus. For goodness sake.
I honestly envy you, because I have seen too many movies, and as I said earlier, I'm trying to just give myself enough brain damage so that I can experience some of these things for the first time again. But you have such an incredible odyssey in front of you of these things that you can experience for the first time that affected me so profoundly upon my first experience that I yearn for that initial experience again. But anyway, Office Space is basically a movie about the drudgery of 9 to 5. It's very funny. And anyway, there's a part where one of the workers who's been at this office desk 9 to 5 job, cubicle job, for like 30 years, he gets hit by a truck or something, and he's completely paralyzed. And he wins a lawsuit, he gets rich, never has to work again in his life. And there's a scene where he's in a wheelchair. There are rods sticking out of every bone in his body. He can't even move. The only muscles he can move are in his mouth. And he says to the main character something along the lines of, I used to be working a bum job at a desk 9 to 5. Look at me now.
There ain't no such thing as a free lunch.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I actually have a friend who, oh God, this is just like, just American cynicism 101. But I have a friend who I was catching up with him after many, many years of not talking with him. And over the last couple of years, we had messaged, and he was always telling me how broke he was. And then we finally caught up over Skype during the pandemic. And one of the first things he says is like, he's in this badass house, and he was like, "Oh, this is my house. I just bought in DC." And I'm thinking to myself, "Damn, DC, that's like expensive real estate. This guy obviously ain't broke anymore." And then we were talking about other stuff, and then at the end of the conversation, he reveals to me that he was in a bar, and he accidentally left the bar with a drink, which is illegal in America. And the bouncer grabbed him too hard and pushed him into a wall, and it shattered his knee, and he sued the bar. And it was a similar situation where he was like, I used to be broke, man, but I shattered my knee, and look at me now, baby. And I was like, damn, am I really man, his knee got better and now he has a house. Am I jealous?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of am.
Yeah, not necessarily a bad strategy.
Right? Yeah, totally.
As I understand it, it is an industry.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. But is that kind of litigious culture a thing in Finland? Do you have those kind of scumbag lawyers? I mean, I know you don't have advertisement for them, because in America you've got scumbag lawyer billboards, or literally in New Mexico where my parents live, there are billboards for these two lawyers named Lerner and Rowe, and their saying is, "In a wreck, get a check," and the entire billboard is just stacks of money.
Yeah. No, the legal system doesn't really bend that way. It's more of the state's responsibility to look out for the citizens. I'm not by no means an expert on the legal system. Fortunately, I haven't had to be much in touch with the lawyers and so on. But yeah, for one thing, if there is an accident, then okay, there's insurance that covers things, and also healthcare is provided, so it's less of a thing. There's less pressure. I don't know about the technical legalistic side, but from a motivational standpoint, there just isn't too much point in trying to sue people, and also the laws might be a bit more meh about this, which also might mean that the laws might protect private property even more aggressively than in the US.
So I'm sure you probably don't know the answer to this, but let's say that I'm working, I'm like a violinist or something like that, and I'm on a bus that my orchestra company has chartered for me to go play at a concert, and the bus gets in an accident. That's the bus driver's fault, and my hands get crippled, and I can no longer play the violin. Who pays, who pays for my well-being if I can no longer support myself? Is it the case that in Finland they pay for retraining instead of basically just saying, okay, here's the amount of money that you were making per year for the rest of your life, which is kind of what people sue for in America?
I'm guessing it would be for an amount of money, I suppose. Not sure. But yeah, in that example, there's multiple layers of insurance that you you have your car insurance and so on that covers all the things, or it's at least supposed to.
Right.
But yeah, of course, we're by no means immune to, for instance, in these sort of cases, getting the money out of the insurance company might be tricky because they have their own doctors who are directed to fuck people over, basically, regardless of their oaths.
Yeah. Well, that's where your theater degree or one's theater degree comes in, because that's a whole other thing in America. Is oh my neck, Yeah.
But well, another sort of performative career that can land you in Hollywood, I suppose.
Talk about performance. I mean, performance is just kind of the maybe deliberately unappreciated art that really encompasses seemingly most careers. I mean, even if you just work in retail, chances are you're performing like you don't think that the customer is an annoying piece of shit, or I mean, most people are always performing. I try to be as authentic as possible, especially since I was performing for years. I was kind of performing a caricature of myself, which didn't necessarily bother me, but it definitely bothered me when I was kind of, I wouldn't say forced, but I had to make decisions that I wouldn't otherwise make. So kind of authenticity is something that's really important to me, and it's something that I think being, maybe not necessarily in Finland, but not being in Hollywood is a luxury that's afforded to me. So I'm definitely trying to take advantage of it now. And I also just think that even kind of the grayer elements of my personality, I think that, if my dark sense of humor or anything like that, if those initially offend someone, I really believe that if you just talk to somebody patiently, one-on-one, like an individual, that you'll find that you actually don't really have any antagonisms toward each other. And so, and I would much rather have that one-on-one conversation than be putting on this facade of a more, politically correct or politically palatable person, which is kind of what you always have to be doing. in certain industries.
No. And I think it's spread out via social media. This thing where all communication is based on basically abbreviated speeches that you post and you get a reply, and you post and you get a reply, and so on and so forth. Whereas in face-to-face communication, like we nod and or shake our heads and sort of indicate what our vibe is, and if we look confused, well, we can sort of the speaker can offer a bit more elaboration so that the miscommunication is minimized. And also, when we see each other's faces, we're more sympathetic to each other. It's just a fact of life. And maybe it creates a bit of that tribal identity thing as well, so that you just end up considering this person more of a person if you're with them face to face.
Yeah, I think that the most important tool in a filmmaker's toolkit is the ability to create a tone, and I think it's the same thing for just even person-to-person communication, or even just business communication, leadership, is just being able to strike a tone, because that will, and that's something that you can't do on Twitter because it's just text, and it's not very much text at that. So yeah, if I was to tell a dark joke on Twitter, I'm playing with fire because I don't have the opportunity to strike that tone. And so that's one of the reasons I'm not on Twitter.
Yeah.
Because fuck that. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't post on Twitter. Like, we run ads on Twitter, basically. We just make announcements, and that's that. We don't, like... if someone DMs us, we might, like... If it's something like... are you going to interview this person? Then we might reply. But other than that, no, we don't argue there. That's a really... It's a good place for arguments, but very bad for actual conclusions or solutions.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Twitter is the worst. Absolutely.
It's a cesspool for sure.
Yeah, and it's structurally
One thing we talked about before the chat started that I actually want to get your thoughts on is we talked about the idea of platforming and the idea of how certain people with, I don't know if you would use this word, but I've heard people use the word of like dangerous ideas about giving them a platform is something that people with an audience perhaps have the duty to avoid doing. So for example, in my recent interview with Ben Burgess, there was a commenter who said that, Joe Rogan deserves all of the hate that he has gotten from the left because he made household names out of people like Ben Shapiro. But I got to tell you, I disagree with that because, first of all, Joe Rogan is not so powerful that he can make a household name out of anybody. I mean, he's literally had thousands of guests on. I really think that the unfortunate truth here is that Ben Shapiro's words have resonated with people. It's the content of his speech that has made him a house, combined with the visibility of the Joe Rogan podcast. But it's not enough just that somebody, quote, platforms somebody. It also has to be that the ideas resonate. And, you and I were talking a little bit before about one individual that I've been considering talking to on my channel who is, people have very strong feelings about this individual. And, I was very tempted to just like have a message on my channel that says, hey, if you're the kind of person who can't evaluate an idea on its own merits, then unsubscribe. This channel is for fucking adults, So like, if you think that I am, or if you think that being exposed to an idea is going to, implicitly make you more sympathetic to it, then don't fucking watch,
Yeah. Okay. My approach there is that what is the objective? For instance, if first to go to the point about Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's podcast is a commercial platform. Ben Shapiro wouldn't have been on Joe Rogan if he wasn't a household name already. I think that it goes the other way around, that you get onto these podcasts because you're well known. And Ben Shapiro
sometimes, but I mean, but sorry, Joe Rogan has all these MMA dudes that I've never heard of on his podcast all the time.
Yeah, but isn't he like in MMA?
Joe Rogan?
Isn't his background in that sort of area somewhere?
It is. But my point is that, like, you know, he's not bringing these MMA dudes in because they draw in a big audience. He's bringing them in because, I don't really listen to his stuff. Maybe I'm being a little bit too charitable and assuming that he's bringing him in because he just likes talking to them. But, but also, like, he just doesn't need the visibility. Like, he doesn't need to bring on a Kardashian to get more numbers. He's got the numbers.
Yeah, but when it comes to, like, I think the MMA thing might just be that he wants to invite in people that he's got stuff in common with, that would be fun to talk with, and so on and so forth. But Ben Shapiro, he was known already. There's a reason Joe Rogan, or, well, the channel in general, was aware of Ben Shapiro. And that, I think, I wouldn't blame Joe Rogan for this. Joe Rogan gets a lot of flack for, he does have has presented some fucked up views. Also some, like, quite okay views. He's not, like, the sharpest tool in the shed, but yeah.
So I'm not being facetious. I'm actually just curious, like, what is the fucked up view? Because I hear people say that all the time, but I really don't know what they're referring to.
I haven't looked into it in detail, but I think it's basically transphobic stuff and homophobic stuff, which is Joe Rogan might not have understood what he's saying, because a lot of I'm in the know for the most part when it comes to terminology and that sort of thing, but even I'm not, like, up to date on terminology or practices. Our society is so sexist and so transphobic, and we've internalized all that stuff so deep down that someone like Joe Rogan, who isn't in the circle, probably just doesn't know about a lot of these sort of cancellation attempts, or this outrage is mostly about people not really knowing what they're saying or how it comes across to some people, and it's largely unintentional. And then we get these, like, threatening tweets, and like, you have the call-outs first, which are, hey, you said this problematic thing, and it's problematic because of blah, and it would be nice if you didn't do this, like, in the future, which is feedback, exactly what you should be doing. But then you have these a very angry, confrontational, not even confrontational, punitive messages that say that you are a morally bad, like, you're an evil person because you said this, and there isn't really this rehabilitative aspect to it, and that causes a backlash, because if someone's going to threaten you, you won't take them serious. You won't take them as being on the side of the angels, so to speak. So that becomes very much a problem. I think that's my general view on the matter.
Yeah, I wish, and of course, neither one of us seem to be we're not Joe Rogan experts enough to really be able to dive into specifics here. I wish that we could, because a pet peeve of mine is I don't want to adopt other people's opinions that are in my quote unquote tribe just because of, like, laziness. And so, for example, like, I don't really have an opinion about Joe Rogan. I've listened to probably never even a whole podcast, but maybe, like, 10 to 15 clips. and he's never said anything that's offended me. And I have not read any quotes of his that have ever offended me. And so I don't really know what to do about, like, well, what is my opinion on Joe Rogan?
Yeah.
Like, if I were to trust, like my comrades or whatever, and I say comrades not like in a political way, but just like, people, like
Peers,
friends of mine who, my peers.
Affinity group.
But that's just, it's just like, I don't really want to adopt an opinion about something that I don't know about, because I have done that in the past, and then when I actually end up reading the source material, I end up disagreeing, and then I end up just being disappointed in myself.
There's so much content around. There's like socially relevant or socially significant content, or stuff we view to be such, that you simply cannot consume all of it. You can't really be in the know about all of it. So then people start tweeting excerpts and saying that, see how they said a bad thing. So it's has to be out of context. And if it's like a 3-hour stream, you can't really go into context. Unless you've got lots and lots of free time, and if you're a content creator, you don't have the time, quite simply. So then you end up with other people's takes, and that's not a good look. That's not a good idea. And that gives control over the discourse to the people who are very much on the punitive side of the discourse on social media. Like, for instance, this sort of woke scolding, I don't actually view it. I view it as inherently non-leftist, because leftism includes the idea of rehabilitative justice, that it shouldn't be moralizing, that the idea isn't to punish, because then you just end up with one-handed blind people. The idea is to correct mistakes and help people correct mistakes. But then there are people who simply are not rehabilitative, or can't be rehabilitated. And that's another thing, where we get back to the platform issue. But yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask you about another person that, again, I feel like there is social pressure to have a strong opinion about, but I haven't, quote unquote, done my own research. Do you have strong opinions about J.K. Rowling?
Yeah.
So have you read? I never read her essay. I'm not on Twitter, so I haven't read her tweets. But it's one of those things where I am kind of suspecting that if I did do my quote-unquote research, if I did write her essay, I don't know until I do it. But the reason why I refrained from having a strong opinion is because I suspect she might not be the boogeyman that people have made her out to be. But if you know more than I do, I'd love to hear your insights.
Yeah, I don't follow her tweets or anything, but I did look into it a little bit when about this transphobic controversy, and I think it is the complaints are valid. I don't think she is has bad intentions or anything like that. It doesn't come across that way. It's more that she had a trauma about sexual harassment, and that then sort of trickled over to the discussion about trans people and trans rights, and there was this sort of it festered the whole discourse, really, and she picked a camp. And I think that nowadays her status is such, she's a billionaire, she is very distant from other people, and she doesn't really have a frame of reference that would allow her to identify with everyday people, and just simply is blind to these injustices. And I think that's most of the idea. But I'm not an expert. But I think there's some rehabilitation that needs to be done there, and that can be done there. I suppose. But a lot of this, the reason I see the online cultural discourse being so toxic is that these platforms have given a voice to people who have been previously silenced. And these are people who undergo a lot of like minor shit throughout the day. Nothing necessarily that dramatic, just using the wrong pronouns, like things that are just misunderstandings and not like malevolent necessarily. And it really gets to you. It really fucking gets to you, gets on your nerves. And then at some point you will snap, and the platforms themselves ensure that the one who snaps the worst gets the most exposure. Mm-hmm. And then the ball starts rolling, and you just need like two people who are having a bad day, and you get into an impasse where you can't really, when they cease to talk to each other anymore, because the platforms simply do not allow actual discussion.
So you're saying that J.K. Rowling made some harmless errors that she was berated by, and due to the nature of the platform, all of that, all these minor grief or like grievings that were targeted at her just made the discourse continue to spiral until she was put in a position to where she said some things that were a little bit more antagonistic than, perhaps she actually believed, without the nature of the platform kind of pushing her to that extreme of a position. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Actually, they weren't harmless. Like, they were harmful, very, very harmful. But I don't. My guess is, this is again, I'm sort of guessing what the intent was, but it was a mistake.
Harmless intent.
Yeah, like,
I guess is what I meant.
Good intentions and so on and so forth.
Right.
Because, as I understand it, she's in the sort of earlier feminist discourse, and where the rights of women specifically, and not trans people, that women's rights could be seen as being diluted by trans people. And I sort of get the idea. I don't think that is what's actually happening, and so on. But I can see how someone might see it that way, and it creates these conflicts with tired defensive people. But yeah, I'm not an authority on this. There are lots of folks.
Neither am I.
Check out Lindsay Ellis. I think Lindsay Ellis had a pretty good take on this. Lindsay Ellis tends to have good takes for the most part.
Yeah, I met her once. She seemed nice. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to this particular issue, everything I hear, I have no firsthand experience with. I have very little. Everything I'm hearing is basically just parroted out of like somebody who has been exhausted and is really frustrated. And I feel like everything that I've heard from probably both sides is just, as you said, probably somewhere down slope of the snowball of the outrage machine. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert either. I probably have a lot to learn when it comes to this particular issue. But I think I mentioned this on the Mindgasms podcast. I just do find it incredible how J.K. Rowling, who basically created the most popular book series in the world, which was philosophically about rejecting essentialism, ends up in the doghouse for being too essentialist.
Yeah, well, essentialism is easy, like because it's easy to make blanket statements on social media. So that's what happens.
Yeah, The only thing about that, like I do think that the term essentialism is the left treats it as a little bit too much of a boogeyman. And one thing I am critical of is that I've been in conversations with people in which they kind of equate, like sometimes with people, if someone brings up like a biological point or like an essentialist point, people will say, well, if you think critically, you'll actually come to the more sociologically determined perspective. And I don't like the notion that critical thinking will always lead you to the quote unquote truth, which is the socially determined perspective, or being like 100% socially determined. And that's why I think that, people can, the idea that we need to defeat essentialism in every discourse, I think, is a little bit overdone.
Yeah, yeah, it's sort of hard to make out where essentialism ends and just necessary generalization begins, or the other way around. That we have to make generalizations in order to be able to communicate. But then we get essentialism, which would state that because you basically that you appear as A, therefore you subscribe to B, and that's very much of a problem. We can't really get rid of stereotypes. Like stereotypes have generalizations, not stereotypes. Generalizations, they have their definite use as a starting point, because we have to frame the world somehow, and trying to, if we approach everything like as a blank, then we can't really be able to communicate about anything with anyone in a meaningful way. So instead we need to start with those generalizations, but simply understand that they are generalizations, and be ready and eager to make corrections there. I think that's the thing, and our platforms don't really allow for corrections. Once this interview is done, it's done, and the only way we could change the content is if basically we take it down. We could like snip out pieces and remove context, but that is all we can do. We can't really like make corrections anywhere, and we have to be aware of these problems, which is social media has normalized a lot of bad stuff about human communication.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned stereotypes and generalizations, because something recently, so at the company that I'm working for, there's like these brand guidelines, and one of the guidelines, I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, because it very much has to do with stereotypes and fighting stereotypes. And basically the guideline is that like we can't portray damsel in distress scenarios because it promotes negative stereotypes about women. And I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this, because I completely disagree. For 4 reasons. One, I think that the ability for women to be strong and empowered is self-evident. I don't think that we really need to fancy ourselves as social engineers that need to curate our art in order to, convince people that women are self-sufficient and capable. Secondly, like, when did we get so cynical as to think that, these video games that we make are going to be the main motivators for the production of the self-image of women? Like, when did we decide to completely give up responsibility of teaching our children that, no, you shouldn't look to this video game to construct your identity. You should look at these like various, women heroes, whether in the sciences, in math, in business, Thirdly, like, okay, hold on. Like, I don't know. And then the other thing is that, like, in this particular situation, we're talking about advertising. And when you're talking about advertising, you are dealing with, like, trying to appeal to people on, levels. They're not paying to watch your content. You have to grab their attention. And when you're dealing in that domain, you're dealing with, like, okay, we have to appeal to people on, like, these deeply ingrained psychological archetypes. And in this scenario, like, a damsel in distress archetype might be effective. And so I really just think that this is more of, like, what I said with the sustainability hire. It's just like corporations covering their ass by promoting things that seem progressive on the surface, but I don't really think actually are.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
and the fourth thing was, like, do we really think that women seeing an ad is going to stop women from trying to achieve? Fuck that.
I
Like, yeah.
okay, here we're running into a couple of things that okay, yeah, individually a game probably isn't going to make that much difference, but it is a part of a larger field. And if every game designer or developer decides that, yeah, it's not our problem, it's not our job to provide representation, then we end up simply replaying the old flaws and the old weaknesses, and we end up with this more of the same old. We end up with tokenism and so on, because no one dares to take the leap. Then there's the
Oh, see,
hmm?
I was gonna say I disagree. I think that, like, if for example, I'm pressured to create an inverse situation of that ad in which a woman is saving a man, I mean, that's the tokenism, because I'm really just, like, creating this female character to, like, be like the token strong woman, because I think that women, can't speak for themselves. But also, like, in that situation that you described, like, it opens up a opportunity for novelty, and novelty will always be a like an important economic driving factor. And yeah, if everybody starts doing the same damsel in distress thing, then that's only going to, create an opportunity for a new perspective to arise and be very palatable based on just the fact that it's new and stimulating. And so again, like, I don't think that we need to police these things, because they'll kind of police themselves.
Actually, I think that, because there's a contradiction in the production of media that really comes to the fore here, is that developers would probably want to do, want novelty. That's what developers want, like creative people want to do, novelty. Absolutely. But executives don't. The money people, they are very averse to risk. They don't really want to do any novel stuff. They just want a return for their investments. So there is that pressure. But and this links up with another thing that I was coming to, is that these stereotypes and positions are usually fairly misunderstood. Like the damsel in distress isn't. It's just not necessary. Like, a woman being in trouble isn't the problem. But the only woman in the story being in trouble so that the male protagonist has something to do is a problem. But there's a lot of space for movement. If you have lots of or a significant representation of woman characters, then you don't really end up with the damsel in distress thing, unless they're all damsels in distress. So that the variety is more the issue there, because the damsel in distress was usually the only woman character in stories.
I guess I think that the market has to prove that they are hungry for new representation. I think that if you try and force it down people's throat, it's only going to breed resentment. which we see in America in terms of this whole reactionary force of the right who disdains anything that Hollywood puts out because they just consider it woke washing, or everything has been woke washed, whether it's Ghostbusters or whatever. And I think that if we were less less keen on problematizing these very familiar things, then people will naturally grow a hunger for newer stuff. And again, like, yeah, maybe investors for these like established brick and mortar corporations aren't going to be the ones that take that risk, but it's going to open opportunity for new entrepreneurial efforts who are nimble enough to take those risks. And I think that that's really how you kind of like build authentic passion for, these new representations.
Yeah, well, that's what indie developers do. What novelty we get and the what representation we get is from indie developers. In the big budget things, it's mostly tokenism, and it's sort of bad faith. But indies do that, but they don't get a market share because they don't have the marketing budget. And we end up with this, we have representation in these lots of games, but they don't get the visibility of Call of Duty.
Or correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that you're describing the system, it seems like no matter what the actual avatar is, it's always going to be tokenism, just based on the thinking process of the executives and the market.
I think there are strata at work here, that we have this sort of indie games and let's call them for simplicity's sake indie games and AAA games, where AAA games don't really do anything because they're run by executives. They set the framework and they don't want to do anything novel. And in indie games, you have creative people doing creative stuff, but they don't get the visibility because these want to gobble up the visibility. So it's not tokenism at the indie level. It's actual representation, but the market forces themselves, or the system itself, favors the low effort tokenism, if you get my meaning. So it's the market is the problem. It's not the devs that are the problem.
I agree. And what I meant to suggest was that only in like the AAA Call of Duty sphere, I guess my point is whether it's a damsel in distress or whether it's a woman saving another woman or something that is counter to this stereotype, it's always going to be a tokenism because of just the overall business practices of these large, huge developers.
Yeah.
And then, I think there are some very positive things about YouTube and all these streaming platforms, that have made extremely rich celebrities out of indie developers. And now, granted, I know that that's basically lottery winners, because there's so many indie games out there, for every for every Stardew Valley, there's probably 1 million games that never see the light of day that are probably very interesting. But, it does happen. And these streamers who are not as, beholden to executives and investors are, able to elevate these kind of more authentic pieces of representation to, real audiences.
Yeah, it's a big struggle, and I think if we want to get rid of tokenism on any level, really, what we really need is representation in the people making the games, because then you get viewpoints. Like the reason we have the damsel in distress is that the games and the stories were made by guys who were never subjected to other roles. That it didn't occur to us that the damsel in distress is a monotonous thing, because we focused more on the male characters or the men characters, and that, yeah, we need diverse backgrounds because background matters ultimately. Like I have a very like if we were to work on the same game concept, we would come up with very different ideas simply because of where we grew up. Like, and if we look at media, if we look at Thug Notes, there are very few white guys who could have written Thug Notes, I think. And your background really mattered there.
Maybe in Finland, but not in the United States. I mean, because there's, if you live in Louisiana, you live in Houston, you live in, there's like a lot of diversity and like very diverse communities in the United States where, it's a very common thing for white people to be going to be living in cultural centers and schools and stuff that are predominantly African American.
But I think you discussed this with either Douglas or Ben that
Doug.
That it would have been nice to have a black writer for that who was like in the know as well, because the fact is that they would have had even a stronger grasp of the language and of tropes and what those tropes actually mean related to the role portrayed.
But that knowledge would not only come from the color of their skin, but also from the color of their skin combined with their economic and historical background. The thing that I see happen in Hollywood, to kind of bring it back to the initial subject of the conversation, that I see all the time is like, hey, we need more diversity. Let's hire all these like Harvard grad black people who, whose parents are just as rich as some white people. So, that's where it gets a little bit shallow for me. But I hear your point.
Yeah, but it's because ultimately it is about having that experience, not having the appearance. Like,
right.
Barack Obama Barack Obama couldn't have written Thug Notes. I think you did a good job with Thug Notes, and Barack Obama, as black as he is considered by the media, then could not have written as representative a script as you did.
And I don't want to suggest that people's appearance doesn't affect the way that they experience the world. It very much does. And even those Harvard black people have been treated in a particular way because they are black. And I even know some black people that come from very wealthy families, and they always feel like the token because they live in mostly, or they've grown up in mostly like white predominant communities and stuff like that. But I do ultimately believe that class is more of an your class position will form your perspectives and beliefs more than the color of your skin. And, there's no real way to measure that, but just from my anecdotal experience, that's kind of the conclusion that I've come to.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfectly fair statement to make. Because, we could go on, but we've been talking for 2 hours now.
Sure.
So sure. I think I've only had breakfast today, so I'm getting.
Oh my gosh! Well, it's nice to finally talk to somebody in the same time zone.
I noticed,
because the time zone has been such a bitch.
I was actually, when I watched the Ben Burgess interview, I was like, Jared, dude, you look like death, not even warmed up over. That you look dead.
Yeah, well, I'm also getting over a sickness. I haven't actually said this, but I'll just say it here. Fuck it. I've actually had mononucleosis since fucking May, and I'm just finally getting over it. It's been 5 months.
Isn't that the kissing disease?
Kissing disease, and I've had it once in my 20s. It lasted about 6 months, and then again somehow, and It's been a fucking monster. And anytime I schedule something, I mean, lately I'm finally getting over it. Um, but yeah, I mean, like during the Burgess interview, like I had it scheduled for weeks, and then I just so happened to start feeling sick during it, but the show's got to go on.
Yeah.
So that really accounts for. Ben was actually very accommodating in terms of picking a time that was reasonable for the both of us. It was really just kind of my illness that I was dealing with
Yeah, but
that made me look like shit.
yeah, and also the color bleed that happened, the mysterious color bleed thing. That like as a combination, it had a very much of horror film vibe to it, and I recommend it wholeheartedly to everyone. We'll post
I
it.
hope that
It's in the link is in the
that.
description.
Yeah, I hope that I've fixed that and that won't happen again.
Yeah, actually, one thing that I want to before we wrap up, because I didn't quite answer your question about platforming.
Oh, sure.
Platforming, it is a tricky beast. I
Surprised you haven't brought up the Overton window because that's usually what people come back to me with.
I think the Overton window at present is so far right that there's not much we can. Okay, like racism, like full on Ku Klux Klan stuff is mainstream at the moment, even in Finland. We're by no means immune to this. Actually, we have long roots as well in this regard. We sided with the Nazis in World War II, not just out of convenience, I think. But yeah, when it comes to platforming, I think what as a somewhat left-leaning content creator, it's on a practical level not that bad to have a right winger there. But the thing is, debates aren't very. If you're very good at debating, then that's because it'll turn into a conflict anyway. It's just guaranteed to happen, and the audience will be disappointed if there is no debate and butting of heads, and then you can go all, are you entertained? And that sort of thing. But debates aren't, like, you have to be very good at it to really demonstrate superiority in a way that would appeal to a right-wing audience. Because then you're also attracting a right-wing audience.
I'm much more cynical than you are in just terms of the efficacy of debate. I mean, I have seen debates in which I thought like one side was murdered, and then I look at the comments and like everyone in that opposite tribe has it's almost like we're seeing the opposite things. Like I just feel like no matter how successful a left-wing or a right-wing person is in kind of quote unquote defeating their enemy, if you're in that tribe, you're going to see the debate that you wanted to see.
Yeah. Actually, that is my point, that you have to be really good at debate to have any positive impact there at all. Mostly you're like, if you're not in that 1%, like Olympic debate skill category, then you might you're just wasting your time. And you're just then you're just riling people up, and that's not really productive. If you want to do it for entertainment, that's another thing, but
yeah, see, I don't know if I agree with that because I'm like, I go back to, I'm like kind of an apologist for the Zizek-Peterson debate. And like, instead of like, trying to humiliate Peterson, Zizek, I think just, dodged that temptation to make a fool out of him because he knew that the people who love Peterson would never just conceive of him as a fool. And instead, like, I saw a lot of comments saying like, hey, I never heard of the Zizek guy. I'm going to look into him more. Yep. And like that, to me, that's the biggest win. If you have somebody in the Peterson camp who is willing to at least be curious and listen to a left winger, that's the best you can do.
Yeah, I think
in my opinion.
Yeah, first, yeah, if you completely circumvent it, but that's another skill as well. Zizek is really good at that, I think. So it always takes a lot of skill to be able to pull it off, I think. Like, I'm not really don't want to put off people from trying, I don't think we actually lose all that much. I think we, in the left content creator sphere, we have an inflated sense of our own importance, that where like very few of us are in any position to platform anyone. Like, look at ContraPoints, who has the highest notoriety. Still, nothing compared to right wing notoriety.
You mean like Shapiro figures and stuff?
Yeah, because they've got the oil money. We can't really compete with that.
Well, they've got the oil money, but they also have, and I'm sorry to say this, but Fox News is doing a much better job at, fighting the culture war than CNN or MSNBC. Mm-hmm. Why has ContraPoints never been invited to MSNBC? It's because MSNBC or CNN are actually too afraid of any real left-wing positions. Whereas Fox News is not afraid of any real right-wing positions. So I think maybe this is more to what you're saying, where the Overton window is very skewed towards the right, but it's because we don't really have any traditional media real left-wing figures.
Yeah, it's enemy territory, I think. The mainstream media is enemy territory, and the same goes for social media. And I think my point would be that we have to be very deliberate and coordinated in how we do things. Like, I'm not, whereas I think in general leftists shouldn't use Twitter at all, or shouldn't post cats if you want, sure, why not? But political views, probably counterproductive, unless you do it in a planned, coordinated sort of fashion, because the platform itself is going to squash you. It's actively opposed to what you stand for. So you can't really win unless you're very, very, very careful about what you're doing. But yeah, it's more of a, platforming isn't my concern all that much in leftist spaces. It's more of a, are you wasting your time? And also, whereas this sort of punitive, woke scolding, cancel culture stuff is bad, it is a thing that we have to live with. And that's fallout that we need to take into account as well when considering the price of what we're doing. But as to harming the movement,
thesis.
Yeah, basically
Burgess's thesis.
Yeah, I agree with Burgess on this. Well, I agree with Burgess on pretty much everything. I have more problems with Doug. But maybe we'll have a stream at some point complaining about other streamers, because that's actually the thing.
I can intro you to Doug if you're interested. He loves meeting other leftists.
No, that would be cool. Actually, I've been on Mike Watson's The Acid Left podcast, so and he's a Zero Books publisher. An author.
You're already in the world then.
Yeah, nepotism and insider trading sort of. You never get away from it. It's who you know, not what you do.
And believe me, if my daddy was best friends with Spielberg, I'd be, Dad, call Steve.
Absolutely, we shouldn't shy away from those things. It's we just should be transparent about them. We shouldn't kick away privilege, because that's just moral grandstanding. We should use that privilege. But everybody wants the sexier narrative. It's much sexier in America to have pulled yourself up by your bootstraps than it is to have just called daddy. Yeah. The same thing applies here. We have a social democracy, but it's still a very individualistic culture. There's a lot of interesting contradictions here, and I'd be very interested in talking with you about it when you sort of settled in. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this was fun. But thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, thank you, and thanks to our chat audience, and for you people watching afterwards that actually watched all the way through. Well done, and Thank you very much. Jared, is there something you'd like to advertise before I wrap this thing up?
Yeah, I got a new YouTube channel kind of starting from scratch, and it's just my name, Jared Bauer, youtube.com/Jared Bauer. I'm just gonna be having fun. I think the next thing I'm gonna do is there's a guy, another leftist based out of Mexico, but I believe he's Brazilian. His name is Diego Rosarin. Him and I think I'm gonna pilot a new idea called "Is This Funny?" where I'm gonna like bring on other thinkers, and we're going to basically like react to comedy clips that have a political message, which is basically all comedy these days, and kind of react to like, is this funny or is this just like a sermon?
Yeah. And also be like Jared and don't use Twitter. That would be wonderful.
Please don't. I do Instagram. People can find me there. You can check me out at Father of Woody. You know, it's just pictures are, you know, usually less inflammatory. Well, not by usually less inflammatory than text, but, you know, not universally.
Well,
I see TNG Binding has one last question about the food in Finland. You want me to end on that?
Go ahead.
So I've had reindeer on a pizza, and it was pretty good. And yeah, in general, I have been pretty pleased with the food. You know, like the first thing I wanted to try here, being from Texas, was like, okay, what's the Finnish version of Tex-Mex? And it's different, but it's good. You know, they're not trying to just recreate Tex-Mex. It's definitely kind of got its own Finnish spin on it, and I like it. But then again, I'm also like, when it comes to food, I'm a man of exceptionally low taste. Like I eat everything, you know. Yeah, I've been enjoying it. I have no real qualms with the food so far.
Yeah, a lot of the food that we eat here nowadays isn't really all that Finnish.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
So,
but I've had like salmon soup now twice, and I like it a lot.
That's good stuff. But yeah, maybe we'll have a food podcast at some point, because food and the politics of food is an interesting topic. But
are you gonna try to make me be a vegan? If
no.
so, then I don't want to be on the podcast.
No, that would be another discussion, because I'm sort of vegan, but sort of it's a thing again. Yeah, that it's a thing that I want to talk about at some point. But
the only argument I have against it is like, hey man, I don't really get much joy from life, and meat is one of the few things. Don't take it away from me, fuck. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, actually, I have to say, I love burgers. Like that's one of the things I have in life is burgers. I'm very fanatical about my burgers. I got a burger with a seitan patty. That was good. After that, I was very dismissive about beef, because that was so good. It's if you have the chance to have a seitan burger, do so. That's probably better than the alternative.
Do they have it at any of the Finnish chains here?
I don't think so, because seitan, the gluten, makes gluten-free stuff tricky to make, and so on and so forth. But it's my personal favorite. But this is making me hungry, so I want to wrap this up.
Absolutely.
No,
I gotta eat too.
Yeah, no more culinary distractions. But thank you, Jared, enormously for being with us, and thanks to our mods, thanks to our lovely chat audience, and again to you lot that made it all the way through this video afterwards. You can leave your feedback in the comments, and there's also a bunch of social media, email addresses, and that sort of thing. If you have feedback, feel free to bring it on. If it's good, if it's bad, it's fine. If it's ugly, then you can just leave it to yourself.
Save it for Twitter.
Exactly, where it belongs, in the cesspit of human communication. Follow us if you are so inclined, and most of our content is, like the vast majority of our content on this channel, is in Finnish. But if you're not a Finnish speaker, still consider subscribing, because the thing is, this is a small channel. Even if you subscribe, you probably won't see us in your subscription feed, so you're simply boosting us without making any sacrifices. But if you do want to get all our content delivered to straight in your face, then do click that bell. We've got some interesting stuff lined up in the works and so on, and we'll see you later. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.